Hello, this is Luke, coming to you from post-production. This video ended up being about an hour and a half long. I fast-forwarded some of the parts that were a little boring or where I wasn't talking and cut it down to about 40-something minutes. I think this video is a good example of both some of the positives and some of the negatives of AI-assisted development. There are some areas where it was really helpful, and there are other areas where the AI made something that almost worked, but had a kind of a problem that it took me a little while to figure out. So yeah, let's get right into it. Hello, this is Luke, and it's a break from your regularly scheduled programming today. We're going to be doing a little bit of different programming. In this case, we are working on this webhook testing tool app of mine. So if I go to my GitHub page here, this is an open source application that I've been working on and kind of using as a test bed for Claude Code based development. Vibe coding, if you want to call it that. And the idea with this is it's kind of an alternative to this webhook.site, if you're familiar with that, where basically it's going to give you a URL and then you can use that to send HTTP requests to it and inspect those requests. So if I run this here, we can kind of see what I'm talking about. This is what the UI looks like. There's this list of requests, and you can see that there are also these handlers, which are basically express style controller methods and or middlewares that can run when you receive a request to generate the response. And I can send some test requests here. Like if I do this new /test, send, you can see it shows up over here and I can see the exact request and response that was received for that message. Okay, pretty simple. So we're going to be adding a few new features here. Let's go back to VS Code and let's look at our notes. So a couple features that I was thinking would be good to do are these two. And I want to do two at once because I kind of want to illustrate how you can use this workflow to develop parallel features at the same time, as long as they're not in the same area of the code base, because that can be a bit problematic. Okay, so let's get started with this one first. Add a manual. So let's do, well, first let me explain. I have this script that I made for this project, WT. It's just a nice short alias, but basically it allows you to create a new work tree, Git work tree, with its own Claude Code instance in order to, kind of do this development in parallel. So let's call this WT new, and we're going to get a new work tree being created. It's going to start running bun install, and then it's going to open this, this UI here. And so on the top left, we've got Claude. On the bottom left, we've got the app server that's running, the dev server. And on the right, we've got lazy Git. So we can actually see the changes that Claude is making on this particular work tree. And then I can open a new terminal window here and just run the same command again. And I'm going to get another work tree, separate folder, separate Git branch, separate server. You'll notice this one is running on a different port, 3005. This one's running on 3003. And then, yeah, we can kind of do these things in parallel. So let's get started here. So for this one, we want to add, let's compose it up here actually. So we're going to add a manual subsystem to the application. Manual pages should appear in a drawer. Actually, I think, let's look at shadcn UI here. This is the component library that I'm using. And I don't think they call it a drawer, the thing that I want. It's called something else. Let's see here. I sped this part up in post so you don't have to watch me spending minutes looking for this silly component. It's called a sheet for some reason. Okay. Okay, now we know what to call it. I sped this part up too. Paste. There we go. And while that's going on, I'm going to, in this other workspace here, make another prompt. Okay, so now we have these two commands running at once. Another thing is I could do this one. I don't have the autocomplete here because I'm not typing it in the thing. Let's open a new work tree. Okay. Now we've got 3 commands running at once. And you can see how somebody could, in theory, just keep creating more and more of these commands, as long as they're not editing the same areas in the code base. Let's look at this first one here and see what it's doing. So we've got our package.json update, so it's installing the marked library. It's probably fine. There's a few different libraries you can choose for Node Markdown compilation. I don't have a problem with that one. It's creating this manual sheet. If I do click E on this, it'll open it in Helix, which has, syntax highlighting and stuff. We can see a little bit better here. Basically, it's creating a manual sheet. And so the content of this should be, dangerously set inner HTML to some content. And the content is coming from state, and it's being set with this load manual page function. Fine, not too worried about exactly whether it's exactly how I would do it when I'm working with the AI. As long as it's making something that works and that I understand, that's all we really need. Okay, let's look at the loader. What is this about? So this has got that load manual page function. So this is interesting. It's actually putting the markdown right here in this code file. That's not what we want. I'll have to ask it to change that. Compiler, what's this about now? Compile manual page. See, this is like, it's created 2 files to do the same thing, it seems like to me. Maybe it'll clean that up. In the layout, this makes sense. We're just adding that manual sheet. And it's also adding an open function in the sidebar, it looks like, which is good. We'll just give that some time to think. And let's look at what this one's doing here. So we're creating schema, model, doing all this stuff to add this basically new database column, or a table, I mean. This is an interesting case because it's a database table, but it should normally only have 1 row in it because it's a global shared state object for all of the code handlers. Maybe eventually we'll have other types of shared state, but for now, there'll just be the one. So we'll see how Claude is able to figure that one out. And over here, we've got the code editor update. This is probably going to be the simplest one. Let's see what it's doing here. So it's declaring a bunch of types. This is interesting because Claude is not just adding the errors that I asked for, but it's also decided to add some other stuff. But it's actually good because it's fixing this. Whoops. Let's do it like this. It's fixing this type here, that used to be a to-do, where it was just a record instead of actually being a proper type. And so I guess Claude decided to fix that for me. Thank you. Okay, how are we doing over here? It's actually making a commit, which is interesting. That's interesting to me because a lot of times Claude doesn't make the commit. Usually I have like a /commit command that I use, like /commit. Oops, focus it, /commit. But it seems like just when it had made the commit here. Not sure what's up with that. I want to tell it two things. First of all, the loader and the compiler classes are redundant with each other. Okay, let's see how Claude does with that feedback. And this is basically the flow, just kind of going back and forth between these, seeing what it's doing. Let's take a look at this one now. So, we think, okay, this looks pretty good. Let's test it out, right? So here, fun run dev, accidentally killed that, looks like. Port 3007. Okay. And one thing I'll call out too, this admin dashboard is gated behind a username password login. I've just already logged in this browser, so it's not prompting me for it, but this is not a publicly accessible dashboard. Okay, so if I look at the handlers here now, I should be able to just open one. It doesn't really matter. And I should be able to like throw, new, bad. And you can see I actually get this autocomplete where it's like, it knows that this is a type. Or like if I do like context dot request event dot, and I get this nice autocomplete in here, which is great. This, by the way, is an embedded Monaco editor here. So that's why we've got this functionality in the editor. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do now is /commit over here. And Claude's going to decide how to break this up into some granular commits. In this case, it's probably just going to be one commit, but we'll see what it decides to do. If we go back up here, this one's still running. If we go over here, so this one's done. This is adding that shared state. Let's take a look at what we've got. So we've got shared state here, creating a new table, ID, data, updated at. So this is what I like to see. So the ID, default singleton, that's fine. I might actually change that to, well, whatever, it doesn't really matter. I try and avoid being too picky about these things when I'm doing the vibe coding approach. Data, is just text. Defaults to an empty object, like to see that. Updated at, that's a good thing to track. I was actually going to ask it to include that if it didn't already. And then this is actually adding that value right in there as part of the migration, which also makes sense, like to see that. And in the model, let's actually look at this like this. So we have this function get shared state, which is loading that value. And then it should be parsing it with json.parse, which it is. And then we have update that shared state, which is passing it through stringify and then sending it into the thing. So that seems okay. Let's look at the schema. So the schema's got this thing here. Now, there is a pattern where if I look over here, for example, at one of this request events schema, if something is being stored as JSON in the database, I like to use this preprocess thingy to parse that out instead of having like a separate command or, explicitly calling json.parse in the model. So we could do that here. Let's insert. Okay. So then we need to import this from JSON string. And I'm just going to copy that from up here. I'm still getting used to, this is the Helix editor. I've been wanting to try it out, but I've got my muscle memory for Vim key binding, so it's taking me a bit of time. In any case, so now we've updated this data, so the type of the data is actually the type of the serialized value. One of the things I can also do here is I can actually just do this. and open a new VS Code window in this work tree if I'm doing a more complicated edit. So now, just because I'm more familiar with it, if we pop this open here, we can copy this, put that here. And, for these consts, I don't like these to be capitalized like that. So this should be like shared state schema. So you can see for this particular example, I'm having to do a fair number of edits, which isn't ideal, but that's all right. A lot of it is just because I'm kind of picky about how it works. If it wasn't for wanting to match these conventions, it looked like the code that Claude had was actually fine. But yeah, so let's get rid of that. So we're going to do then this one. I do think that just updating it with the data makes the most sense because all of the other fields are things that we're going to be handling ourselves. Updated at, the ID, those things, the caller of this function doesn't need to care about. They're just setting the data to something and stringifying the data and then putting it in there. Makes sense to me. Okey-doke. So that seems good. For the schema here, seems fine. For handle requests, so let's see where it's actually plugging it in. So we've got some imports, and then it's doing get shared state. And this, let's get rid of that, because what this is actually going to be is the full record. And then down here, we're going to do shared.data. And then down here, that shared, that's going to be correct, I believe. Or no, this would be shared.data. Yeah, okay, fine. Okay. So we made some edits ourselves in VS Code here. Now I can actually just close this window. And I could launch LazyGit again. So now let's tell Claude to add some tests. Well, let's just see where Claude decides to put those tests. I'm not going to give it instruction on that. One of the things I experiment with here is how much instruction is really necessary. And meanwhile, so this one, we just did a commit. This is the updating all of these types. So the commit's done. So at this point, I can actually exit this tmux session. And I get prompted to clean up that work tree, including cherry picking those commits. And now that work tree is done. This first work tree here. So let's look at what we've got now. So it's doing some stuff. And again, this is probably kind of a complicated one. So I'm actually going to open it in VS Code again as well. New code window here. One thing to call out, by the way, this is all running in a work tree, or in a code space, a GitHub code space. Okie doke. So what do we got going on here? Let's look at our commit. I kind of like the GitLens one better. So we've got, it deleted the compiler because that wasn't necessary. The loader, source dashboard manual loader, this is going to have a list of these pages. AI dev to do make this dynamic. Yeah, that would be nice if it was dynamic. And it's fetching. So this is not right. It should just be able to read it from the file system. Well, actually, hold on a second. So this function here, maybe I can see why they did that now. This function is being called from the front end. Yeah, whatever. Let's just go with it. So if we're going to go with it, then maybe we don't need to change anything. So let's actually look at what the server thing is doing here. And I don't want it to use process.cwd. It should be using something that's not dependent on where it's being executed. So let's open this up. I want this to be using import.meta.dir. And then we're going to do, so the directory here is source dashboard, right? So we need to do a dot dot to get us up to source, right? And then we're going to go into docs, and then we're going to add the page name. So this makes sense to me. And then we're also going to want a list of all of the manual pages, but we can do that in another Claude prompted command here. But in the meantime, let's just see if this works. Not sure why these things are getting that sig term, but whatever. So now we're going to open localhost 3003. So here, let's see, is there a manual button that it added? I don't think so. Oh, yeah, down here. Okay, so this is popping up the manual, and okay, it looks weird. Looks weird, but it's working, right? Now add an API route to list all of the available manual pages. Okay, let's see how Claude does with that. Meanwhile, how's this other one going? It's still thinking. What are you even thinking about? I don't even remember. Oh, it's adding tests. Righto. Also, this is interesting that it's using the console log output from the handlers. Console log in the handlers is the output is tracked and stored in the database. And it's actually using that as part of the assertion, which not what I expected. This is the one I'm really interested in, should share data. So we have these three handlers. So the first one is assigning that. Then the second one is pushing that. Then the third one is pushing that. And so then it should have all three of those handlers in there. And this one is skipped. Why is it skipped? Test isolation issues. Well, let's give it some time to think about that. And over here, I'll just pop open LazyGit again. So it's adding this manual list page, and it made a commit. Cool. So let's actually code this again. See what we've got going on here. Okie doke. So here we're adding this, right, another handler here, or another hook, I mean, and seems fine, manual pages. Okay. The loader here, fine. The loader, I should have that update to use manual page as well. So this one is import meta dir doc, so it recognized that that's how I was doing it, copied it down here, and reading all of the files and returning that as a JSON response, which is just an array. Fine, that's good. Okay, so one thing here too is we should, let's see how that goes. Meanwhile, this is just churning on these tests. So the thing with tests, a lot of times there's a bit of churning involved, I've noticed. Hopefully it ends up in a good place. I do like to have it write tests for me because it writes a lot more tests than I would myself if I was doing it by hand. But it also kind of gets some weird results, and it takes a while because it'll like write them and then it'll run them and then it'll write them, adjust them, run it again, etc. It goes through this loop, you know. And if it gets stuck, sometimes it doesn't get out of the loop, or it just comments out that test, like we saw that test that it just decided to skip for some reason. So you kind of got to keep an eye on it. A lot simpler there, a lot more consistent. That's good. Interesting that it's decided to remove that load manual page function altogether. I guess it felt that it was ultimately redundant with the hook. Okay, and what's going on over here? So now we've got all these tests. Let's code this again and mess around with that test a little bit, see what's going on. Okay, so there's one test being skipped and one test failing. Does it always fail? Yeah. Okay, so let's open that handle request, shared state. So this one's failing. It should initialize shared state as empty object. What's failing about that? Interesting. So when I run it by itself, it's not failing. Okay, so the problem is that this shared state is probably being mutated by another test. So I actually have a test cleaner upper thing here that calls this resetDB function. And I do have this note, but it seems that the AI did not realize the need to do this. So I'm just going to do set shared state, or is it update shared state? And I'm going to initialize it to an empty object again after every test. Now let's run that again. Okay, so that fixed that flaky test issue. And now let's fix that skipped test as well, because this is definitely something that should work. Let's see what it's like. Hey, it works. What do you know? It turns out when you actually clean up your state between each test run, it works. Anyway, cool. Let's exit this VS Code window. Don't need that anymore. And we can tell Claude to commit. Also, I don't know if you noticed that flashing there. I've noticed that sometimes this Claude is running in a tmux window, and sometimes it gets kind of messed up, where it'll start to flash like stuff from the scrollback buffer when it redraws the window or something. I don't really know exactly what's going on with that. Okay, so let's look at this other one now while that's thinking. So we have our use manual page function, deleted the loader altogether. And then like in here, it's just doing use manual page. Okay. So let's test this out again. So I think the manual page was this one, right? Yeah. So if I click documentation, we get this, it still works. If I do like something else, we just get an error. Or yeah, looks like it just doesn't do anything. That's fine. Yeah, so now we need to fix this. So let's see if Claude is able to do that. So I'll tell it, I think there needs to be, okay, so it's got the Tailwind Pros. Is there a Shadcn Pros thingy? I feel like there is. Let's see here. Yeah, this one, typography. Okay, it says they don't ship it by default. So you probably are just supposed to use the Pros stuff for it basically, which is fine. Like, I feel like this Pros thing is not working the way that I thought it would. Oh, do I need to install this maybe? Maybe that's why it's not working. Okay. Tailwind CSS typography plugin. So let's do that. So I'm actually going to do this myself. Quit. So bun install Tailwind CSS typography. So now if we look at this, it should look a little better. No. So what is the problem here? We've got the typography installed. Oh, it should be. Oh, okay. I confused myself a little bit here. Let's do this. The problem, or one problem anyway, is I actually edited the globals.css in the non-work tree thing. So sometimes I forget what I'm doing. Let's put it over here. And now see what it looks like. Still not good. Something weird. Something weird's going on there. Let's actually just clean this up for now. Bring it back into the main branch, main work tree here. Then we can mess with the Tailwind stuff a little bit ourselves. Okay. Meanwhile, how's this other one doing? I don't even remember what this was doing anymore. Oh yeah, the shared state stuff. Okay. And just to double check, I should be able to do bun run test. Yep. And if I do lazy git, we can see that we've got some commits here. So let's clean this up, merge those commits. In any case, let's quit this one now. Actually, let's just lazy git it again. Make sure that we're not, yeah, nothing in the working tree. Okay, so we can do Control BQ, clean up, cherry pick, and we get an error. Probably the simplest thing here. So if I discard that, for example, and then over here, I can look at work trees. And this is that work tree, rude bottles to use. And I can take that commit that tried to apply itself. And now that I've cleaned up my local branch, I should be able to just cherry pick that again. So now I've got that, or I should have that on my main branch here. Yeah. Okey-doke. So now we've got a bunch of commits. Let's actually try doing bun run dev here in kind of the main session. Oh, we've got to do bun install. And now if we look at the manual, what does it look like? Okay, it actually has it. Cool. And I also want to give this a little padding. I'm just going to do that myself. So if we go dashboard, manual sheet, this also I'm going to move here. And that should have updated the imports automatically. Yeah. And then in the manual sheet here, we're going to add a little bit of padding. Let's just see what that looks like. And I'm going to need to restart this since I moved that component. Refresh. Yeah, okay, pretty cool. Pretty simple. I kind of want this drawer to be a little bit wider. I see where I I see where the AI got the size because it literally just copied that from here, right? And basically what this is saying, I think, is the width is normally 400 pixels, but if you're above the small breakpoint, then it's 540 pixels instead. So what is this max width coming from? I feel like that max width is the problem. And is that coming from this? Yeah. Yeah, now we get a nice kind of pop-out manual there. Plenty wide, which is kind of important when we start getting to the API documentation. We're going to want that width. Okay, so I'm going to commit this. Because this is something that I did, basically myself, I'm not going to ask Claude to commit it. That's kind of how I distinguish it between them. So I'm just going to write this commit message myself. We still have to write documentation is the next thing, right? So let's actually see if we can get Claude to do that as well. Instead of opening a work tree, I'm just going to run it right here because I don't have anything else in mind to do at the same time. Okay, and then I'm also going to tell it to analyze the context that handler code is executed in. Okay. It did something. So it's got this documentation here. So now I'm going to say, okie doke. So now we have our handler documentation here, and I'm just going to read through this real fast. Whoa, look at this. Suggesting a rate limiting handler? That's kind of tricky. I like that though. In case you're wondering, kind of my thinking for this shared state was actually for handling things like OAuth flows or anything where there's multiple requests that are potentially need to sort of coordinate their state. But the idea of using it for rate limiting is an interesting one as well. So this we don't need. This we also don't need. And this we also don't need. Get rid of all that. Yeah. I just want to document the behavior. We don't need to like give the user like some weird suggestions. Okay. Cool. So let's do /commit on that. Okay. So now I'm going to do add a link to the handler documentation when below the handler code editor in handler form. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new tab here and just do bun run dev. Again, I'm not doing this in the work tree because I don't really have anything else that I want to be doing at the same time. Refresh. Just close that. Yep. So this is interesting. Use the sidebar to navigate through different sections of the manual. That doesn't work. There is no such thing. So we could get rid of that little comment. If we actually look at one of these handlers here, handler documentation, beep. It's a thing. It's got the stuff. Does it look perfect? No. Good enough though. Okay. And then in the home here, I'm going to get rid of this. Arguably, there's not a whole lot of point to actually having this home page unless it's also linking to the other handler pages, but we'll deal with that later. Okay, so now we've got this. And like, you know, this should probably be a use callback. I don't really care. Okay. Commit. Commit's done. Let's just get out of Claude here. And pretty much done with this demo. Let's push our changes. So let's see, it's been an hour and 18 minutes since I started. And in that time, we have improved the types for our handler code editor, which is nice. That wasn't a huge change, but good thing to do. We added the shared state functionality for our handlers, which involved adding, you know, a new model, new table, etc. Also updating the handler code to pass that through. And we added a manual subsystem with API routes to query for the manuals and a UI to render the manuals in the dashboard. And we documented the behavior of our handler code APIs that we've exposed. Is that a lot to do in an hour? Is that a little to do in an hour? I don't really know. I'm often paying attention to how, basically whether I feel like the AI is accelerating me or not. As you can see, there's a lot of times where it's writing a bunch of stuff that I didn't have to write that. That accelerates me. But then there's also times where I have to kind of suss out, like, why did you just randomly decide to skip this test? Or, you know, why is the markdown not rendering right? Oh, I have to install this plugin that you didn't do. And so there's definitely some oversight that is involved there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And then, you know, I can push these changes here. I don't really know why it's not showing up down here to be pushed. Just going to click that though. Yeah, okay, so we pushed them all. And so now, you know, if I look over here, we've got all those commits, right? And one kind of cool thing in GitHub, you can actually see the commits that Claude was involved with actually has the Claude user in there. So there's a mixture of commits that Claude created and commits that I just created myself. All right, that's about it. Thanks, y'all.